Now it's time for today's perspective, and my guest on the programme today is a woman who says that as a student, often being the only black person in the room led her to having a hyper-awareness of blackness. She also has a BA in the history of art from the University of Cambridge, and she combined, if you like, both of the above to write her first highly acclaimed book. Alayo Akinkugbe is author of Reframing Blackness, What's Black About History of Art, and she joins us here in the studio. Thanks very much for coming in. While you're talking, we're going to see some images which may well illustrate some of the issues you're talking about, also some images as well from an exhibition that you've curated as well. But I'd like to start off, if we can, talking about you a little bit, about understanding you. You were born and your childhood was in Nigeria, and then that really changed when you moved to the UK, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So I grew up in Nigeria until I was 11 years old, which I talk about in the preface, how Nigeria is the largest black nation on earth. And I moved to a boarding school in the UK, in Kent, which of course was a stark difference to the Lagos that I knew, the Lagos that I'd grown up in. And I suppose being in an environment that was so starkly different and that was so much more white, I think made me hyper aware of my own blackness, and is perhaps why I've ended up writing so much about blackness in art and focusing so much on black figures and the way that they're represented.
Yeah. What was it like then, being the only black person in the room, as you put it?
I think initially it was very difficult for me because I just hadn't been used to standing out because of my race. It was something that I guess over time I got used to because it became my normal. I spent 7 years in an English boarding school, and there were a few other Nigerians who actually joined while I was there, but repeatedly having that experience and then going on to study art history at Cambridge and being the only black student there in my year, repeatedly having those experiences, I think, can make you hyper aware of your own blackness and maybe hyper aware of the position that blackness occupies in relation to whiteness as well. So yeah, and I realized that I was thinking about it a lot more, about race a lot more than my white counterparts and peers and friends.
And was it just a feeling of being different, or did you come across, presumably at some points, direct racism?
I mean, of course I encountered microaggressions and direct racism all through my life, and I think it's something that all black people experience I wouldn't say every single day, but often enough if you're living in the West. I suppose the feeling of difference was not one in which I felt like, oh, it's a positive thing. Like I'm very happy to feel like a sort of outsider. I did feel somewhat isolated, especially when studying art history, because it is typically considered a very white subject. And when I was studying it, I did really, really love it. And I went into university knowing it was this very Eurocentric thing. But I just really, I loved everything that I was learning. Yeah. And it wasn't until my second year that I became aware of the fact that I hadn't been learning about any black artists. And then that was sort of like the light bulb moment of, this isn't right, and I need to address this for myself more than for anything else.
And where does the love of art come from in you, do you think?
I think, strangely, in growing up in Nigeria, I didn't go to museums. And a lot of the art that I encountered was in domestic settings, in people's homes. And at school, I suppose art was a lot more emphasized in my secondary school in the UK than it had been in Nigeria. So I guess the love of art sort of began there, this idea that I could create these oil paintings or work in acrylics or whatever. But I think it was really in sixth form, because my school offered art history at A level. That was when the sort of like spark was ignited. Yeah. And I saw this painting at the Louvre by Marie-Guillemine Benoit. It's called La Femme Noire. And that sort of really hooked me and got me interested in the way that black muses and black models were represented. And yeah, I can't really explain why, but it just sort of like really, it was kind of this all-encompassing
this is my
calling,
my way.
Yes,
yeah. This is my destiny.
I felt like
That's
I found
the word.
my thing. Yes.
Yeah. So that actually happened here in Paris then, at the Louvre.
So actually it didn't, because my school teacher showed me a photo of the painting, and then I saw it whilst writing the book. And there's actually in one of the chapters I talk about the experience I had there.
So tell us about the book then. I mean, what will people get out of it? What will people find out in it?
Well, I think that the book will sort of introduce to anyone who thinks that they know art history a new perspective, a new way of looking at art history. It examines the relationship between blackness and Western art history specifically, because it's within this context that blackness has been particularly othered and marginalized. And I look at museums and where you find black people and black figures within them, in the corners of paintings, in the background, in the bodies of staff, usually in security guards. And the book opens with an anecdote with a security guard who singled me and my mum out to show us 3 depictions of Balthazar, who's one of the 3 kings that goes to visit Jesus. And that desire for people who occupy these spaces, for black people who occupy these spaces, to see dignified representations. So that's the first chapter. And then I also look at feminist art movements where black women have sat within and outside of them. The curriculum, particularly in the UK, even looking at the Life in the UK test, which very shockingly has a list of artists that you need to learn in order to become a British citizen. Yeah. So I took this test while writing the book, and every single one of them is a white man. And so that was something to think about. Yeah. And so yeah, the curriculum, and then I look at muses as well. That's probably the longest chapter. Yeah. And finally exhibitions. And in that chapter, I interviewed some brilliant curators, Dr. Denise Morel, who actually curated La Modèle Noire, which showed at Musée d'Orsay, and Echo Eshin, who's a brilliant curator in the UK, sort of becoming quite internationally renowned, Legacy Russell, and Koyo Kuo, who was actually going to curate next year's Venice Biennale, but she sadly passed away a few months ago. So yeah, the book is very personal and contains a lot of my perspective, and I'm not trying to assert anything. I'm not trying to say this is how you must look at art history, but I'm just trying to share my perspective and hopefully broaden people's gazes and the way they approach art history.
What I loved, or not loved, but what I noted, I suppose, from your answer there is that you said you had to look into the background, you had to look into the corners of the paintings to find those representations. Some of the images that we've been seeing, not this one, but some of the others, really highlight that, don't they? That's what you have to do, which is not right, is it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not that I'm trying to say, like, we must rewrite art history and we must condemn these images for the way that they portray black figures. It's more that I'm trying to highlight the way in which that black figures are perceived, so that hopefully people can have a broader understanding of the way that we, I suppose, exist today and the way that we have existed in visual culture and how that has shaped how black people are perceived. And I'm also, of course, very interested in the way that black artists now have responded to these sorts of paintings. And there's lots of black artists who do this. Kehinde Wiley is one, very well known, and Barbara Walker as well in the UK, who sort of highlights the figures in, she recreates canonical paintings and she'll highlight the black figure by colouring them in graphite, and the rest of the painting, or the rest of her reinterpretation, is kind of like a white sort of perforation. So all the other figures become very ghostly, and your eyes drawn to where these figures sit. And it's often, they occupy a very small part of the canvas. And I'm just interested in the way that these artists, have responded to it.
And Black Lives Matter had quite a profound influence on you as well, didn't it?
Absolutely. The resurgence of Black Lives Matter in 2020 was a key moment for me, because I had started my Instagram page, A Black History of Art, which was in response to not learning about black artists in my first year of studying art history at Cambridge. And of course, at that time, so I had started it in February of 2020. By June 2020, there was this resurgence and everybody was interested in black cultural production all of a sudden. And the page just grew rapidly. And I had floods of messages from people of all generations saying, I studied art or art history in the 80s and I never learned about a black artist, and I've only just realized, and how terrible is this? And it suddenly just became a real thing, something that I had felt was quite niche.
Just 30 seconds to ask you, what's next? Because presumably you want to carry on along this theme.
I do want to carry on all that I'm doing now, perhaps another book maybe focused more on Africa, but I'm also planning to transition slowly into documentary filmmaking.
Well, enjoyed reading the snippets of the book that I managed to get through, and thanks very much for coming in and telling us all about it today on the programme. Alayo Akinkugbe, author of Reframing Blackness, What Black About History of Art. Thanks very much once again for coming in.
Thank you for having me.